Hello everybody, my name is Karryshh and welcome back to another recap video. This time it's a really good Chinese horror movie, A Place Called Silence. It's actually a murder mystery, but the story has so many layers that it will keep you on the edge of your seats until the end. So make sure you watch the video completely. On top of that, if you're new to my channel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up because it is free for you and it is something that helps me out a lot. And now sit back and relax as I recap A Place Called Silence. So this story starts in 2006 at a school where kids were preparing for the upcoming annual function. Now the school's auditorium had a leak in the ceiling. There was a big glass panel up there and water kept dripping through it, which really annoyed the school principal. That day, Principal Gudong brought in a repairman named Wang to fix the leak. In this scene, we also meet Lin, a poor woman who worked as a cleaner at the school. Gudong looked out for Lin since she was struggling, but his daughter, Huijun, didn't like that at all. After school, Lin was searching for her daughter Tong, who was also a student there. Meanwhile, Huijun and her three friends, Yingshu, Zhao, and Welling, were bullying Tong. They had pinned her against a wall, and even the school guard didn't help because he didn't want to get on the principal's daughter's bad side. Huijun accused Tong of stealing her phone. They beat her up and even smeared glue all over her mouth. Tong was furious, but she couldn't say anything. She was mute. The girls eventually left her there, and a while later, Lin found her daughter in that horrible state. Her heart broke. She helped Tong clean up, cut her hair where it had gotten stuck with glue, and reassured her that everything would be okay. Then the focus shifts to Huijun's three friends later that night. They had gone to an abandoned house deep in the woods near the school, a spot where they usually hang out to get high and play tarot cards. Huijun wasn't with them since she had a fever. The girls were having fun when suddenly Yingshu disappeared. Zhao and Welling panicked and started looking for her, but that's when they saw a person wearing a raincoat standing there with Yingshu's lifeless body. It was clear that he was a killer. Terrified, Zhao and Welling ran for their lives but got separated in the chaos. Welling ended up on the balcony, but there was no escape. The killer caught up to her and brutally crushed her skull with a hammer. Meanwhile, Zhao somehow managed to escape the house and ran into the forest, but in all the chaos, she ended up getting injured. Hiding among the trees, she frantically called police, but before she could say anything, the killer showed up and brutally murdered her too. Now here's something interesting. The raincoat that the killer was wearing, Lin had the same exact one. That night, she was up on her rooftop tending to her small garden, wearing that very raincoat when Tong came over to help her. Now you see, Lin had a little side business. She grew some kind of citrus-like fruit in her garden and used to make it snacks that she sold for extra money. Her husband had been living outside the city for years, so this was how she managed. However, what she didn't realize was that someone was watching her and Tong that night. Anyway, the next day, Lin brought her snacks to school, which were pretty popular. She tells everyone that the fruit she used was something her husband had grown. Now the scene shifts back to the abandoned house where Detective Dai and his team were searching for the missing girls. They searched the entire place but found nothing. No bodies, no clues, except for one thing: 4 small paper ducks. Obviously, they were clearly made by a girl, and that detail is something to remember. After this, Detective Dai and his team headed to school. They called in Tong for questioning since she was the last person who had seen the missing girls. Lin immediately rushed in to protect her daughter, but Dai wouldn't let her take Tong away. Tong of course couldn't say anything, and that detail just pissed Dai off even more. Watching all this, Huijun, she was laughing. Then in a most casual way, she told the detective that she doesn't know where her friends are. Last night she went to a school ceremony where she fell in a lake accidentally, and after that she got sick. She was in the hospital all night, so she has no clue where those girls are. Now in class, Tong was drawing a picture. It was of a man lying dead under a tree. Then out of nowhere, a white pigeon crashed into the ceiling and died on impact. After this, Tong cut the drawing into 4 pieces and folded them into paper ducks. Meanwhile, the parents of the missing girls were growing more and more desperate. Later after school, Lin and Tong stopped by a shop where the shopkeeper started touching Tong in a bad way. Obviously, Obviously, Lin immediately stepped in and she was furious cause she absolutely couldn't stand men laying hands on her daughter. Then on their way home, Tong noticed a hooded figure watching him from a distance and it freaked her out. It was obvious that someone was following him. When they got home, they found out that the repairman named Wang that we saw earlier was moving into their apartment building. Lin didn't pay much attention to him and the scene then cut to Huijun, who was sitting in an abandoned bus in the middle of the forest smoking a cigarette. However, suddenly some strange things started happening around her and before she could even process what was going on, the hooded killer appeared outside the window and launched a deadly attack. Huijin fought back, spraying him with a fire extinguisher and trying to escape, but the killer had already locked the exit, and in the end, he caught her and unalived her too. Now we shift back to the school where a teacher named Fang was retiring. He was well respected, so Lin stopped by to give him some fruits from her garden. In this scene, Wang, the repairman, was there to help Fang move his things. He was driving him to his place when we saw Fang's keychain, and in that, there was a key with a strange symbol on it. Later that evening, the school was hosting a function where the students were performing, and Tong was in the audience watching. But in the middle of it, she suddenly saw a white pigeon, and that triggered old memories. Memories we will soon find out about. Meanwhile, Gudong's daughter, Huijun, wasn't answering her phone because, well, she was already dead. Lin was up on the roof cleaning the glass panel where she suddenly realized that Tong was no longer sitting in the hall. Then down on the stage, Gudong pulled a large rope expecting confetti to fall, but instead, Huijun's lifeless body dropped from above, hanging in front of everyone. The entire school went into chaos. Students screamed and Gudong was left completely stunned. Seeing that, Lin rushed downstairs and frantically searched for her daughter, but Tong was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, students started whispering to the reporters that Huijun and her friends used to bully Tong all the time, so maybe, just maybe, Tong was the one who unalived them. However, ignoring all the rumors, Lin ran home, but even there, Tong was missing. That's when she started fearing the worst. She was convinced that the same killer who had murdered those schoolgirls had now kidnapped her daughter. On the other hand, the detectives had their own suspicions. They started looking into a hooded man who had been secretly recording videos of the schoolgirls, someone we had already seen multiple times throughout this movie, always filming. Their second suspect was Wang. Actually, you see, some time ago, a tsunami had destroyed his home, and it was teacher Fang who had saved his life and even got him the repairman job at the school. But later, Wang's daughter had died in a school accident, and ever since then, his behavior had been a bit strange. Back at home, Lin checked the nearby CCTV footage, and what she saw made her blood run cold. On the screen was Wang wearing the exact same outfit as the killer. Obviously now, Lin suspects Wang to be the unaliver, and she immediately go to his apartment to confront him, but he wasn't there. Instead, she found Tong's broken watch and multiple bloodstains. This gave her the certainty that her mind needed. There was no doubt left in her mind that Wang had kidnapped her daughter. In her head, she started piecing everything together, imagining exactly how it must have happened. Obviously, Lin got desperate and she decided that she's going to investigate on her own. So she tries to sneak into Wang's apartment through the window. She wraps a scarf around her waist for support and begins climbing towards his place. But halfway through outside the building, she slips. She falls straight onto an air conditioner unit, cutting her hand badly. But even through this pain, she somehow manages to pull herself together and climb through Wang's window. Now once inside, she starts searching the place and even picks up a paper cutter for protection. But before she can find anything useful, Wang suddenly comes home. Lin quickly hides under the bed, and as Wang changes his clothes, his keys fall to the ground. Here, Lin notices something strange. One of the keys keys has a weird symbol on it. Now before she can process it, Wang's neighbor knocks on the door, chatting about random things. The neighbor actually wanted Wang to give her a ride somewhere, but it gives Lin the perfect chance to escape. Somehow Lin managed to get out of the building, but then she luckily runs into Detective Dai and she tells him that her daughter is missing. Together they check the nearby CCTV footage and they spot Wang throwing large trash bags into a dumpster just a while ago. Lin immediately assumes the worst. There must be bodies inside those bags. She rushes over and starts staring through them, making Dai help her too. But when they open the bags, there's nothing but garbage. Just then, Lin catches sight of the hooded man with a video camera. Without thinking, she takes off running after him. The guy tries to escape but ends up getting hit by a car and Dai catches him. But when they finally get a look at his face, Dai was absolutely stunned because this guy is actually Dai's own son, Alex. Now here the cops confiscate Alex's camera and that's when it all becomes clear. Alex is a messed up kid who has a habit of secretly filming girls. Furious, Dai yells at his son but Alex just laughs like a maniac. Losing his temper, Dai drags him to jail and beats him up brutally, and that's when we learn the truth. Dai has been hitting Alex since he was a kid because Alex had always been a trouble. Now in Alex's camera there was a footage from earlier that morning when Dong was coming home from school, and just like Lin had suspected, the killer had grabbed Dong before she can enter the apartment, and this confirmed it. Dong's life was in danger. Lin immediately presses Alex for answers, demanding to know where the killer took Dong, but Alex refuses to say anything useful. A little while later, as the police go through more of Alex's video, they uncover another disturbing truth. One of the recordings show Lin herself beating Dong with a stick. That's right, Lin wasn't exactly a good mother either. She used to hit her daughter, and all cause she blamed her whenever a man touched her inappropriately, like that day at the store when a shopkeeper touched Dong the wrong way. Now since this child abuse case comes up, Dai confronts Lin about it, telling her that child abuse is a crime. But right now, finding Dong is the priority, so he lets it go for now. Meanwhile, the police raid Lin's apartment and try to arrest Wang, but he wasn't there. Later back at the station, Lin meets another teacher from her school who has been brought in for questioning. That's when she notices something. The teacher has the same key that Wang had, the one with a strange symbol. She immediately asked him about it and he explained that the key belongs to an abandoned building near the school. It's a part of the school's property and only a handful of teachers have access to it. That's when it all clicks. Wang must have taken Dong there. Now without wasting a second, Lin steals the teacher's key and his car and speeds off towards the abandoned building. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Wang, who had reluctantly agreed to give his neighbor a ride after she kept insisting. She was sitting in the car when suddenly a news report came on the radio. Cops were actually searching for Wang. The moment the neighbor heard this, she froze in fear. And of course, now that she knows the truth, Wang wasn't going to let her go. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Detective Dai finds Lin's belongings. And among her things, he discovers a phone. But this wasn't just any phone, it belonged to Lin's husband. The problem was, everyone knew Lin's husband had been out of town for years. So why Lin has his phone? And that's why Dai launches a new investigation to track down Lin's husband. A little later, Lin arrives at the abandoned building, and as she looks around, she stumbles upon a horrifying sight. 3 bodies buried in the ground. The same 3 girls the killer had murdered at the beginning. Lin breaks down crying, thinking her daughter must be dead too. But after searching, she realizes Dong's body isn't there. The scene cuts back to Wang, and he had tied up his neighbor. But surprisingly, he hadn't killed her. Instead, he had taken her to a secluded cabin deep in the woods. Inside that cabin, Wang remembers his past memories, and here we finally learn the truth about Wang, why he became a killer. Actually, you see, Wang had a daughter named Alice. She was a little mentally unstable, but she was kind. Her best friend was Tom, and Alice also had a pet a white pigeon. But one day, Alice was caught by Huijun and her three friends. They dragged her to the rooftop and started bullying her. They shoved sharp objects into her scalp, forced her to drink filthy water filled with hair. Then they turned on her pigeon, hurting it right in front of her. In the end, they pushed Alice onto the glass panel on the rooftop, making her stomp on it over and over again. That's when Tong arrived, and seeing her best friend being tortured like that, she completely lost it. She grabbed a pair of scissors and she was ready to fight back and save Alice, as she would have if Lin hadn't shown up at that exact moment. Lin stopped Tong and forcefully took her away, not wanting her daughter to get caught up in the bullying. She left Alice alone and broken, standing on that glass panel, and then suddenly, snap, the glass shattered beneath her and she fell straight down into the auditorium. The four girls screamed and ran for their lives, vanishing without a trace, and meanwhile Tong and Lin rushed back to the rooftop, only to find Alice's lifeless body below. Now you see, at first, Wang had no idea what really happened to his daughter, but a few months ago, he found a phone in his locker, and inside it, there were footages from right before Alice died. Watching him shattered him, but then he made a decision. He was going to avenge his daughter's death, no matter what, and that's exactly what he did. Wang became the hooded killer. He was the one who had hunted down and unalived those four girls. The scene then comes back to the present, where Wang has teacher Fang tied up inside the cabin. If you remember, Wang had offered Fang a ride after his retirement, but instead of taking him home, he kidnapped him. Now Wang finally tells Fang the truth, and Fang falls to his knees, begging for forgiveness. Actually, you see, Fang had been teaching a class in the auditorium when Alice's body suddenly crashed down from above. When he looked up, he saw the four girls standing on the rooftop, frozen in shock. But instead of calling the cops, Fang did nothing. A little later, Wang arrived at the school and saw his daughter lying there barely alive. He rushed to her, completely broken, and in her final moments, Alice looked at her father, said goodbye, and then she was gone. Meanwhile, outside, Principal Gudong and Fang made a deal. They were going to cover up Alice's death as an unalivement to protect the school's reputation. From that day on, Wang did everything he could to find out what really happened to his daughter, but the principal and Fang refused to listen. The principal claimed there were no cameras on the rooftop, and Fang stuck to the story that Alice had taken her own life. Then one day, Wang went to the police station for help, but while he was there, he saw something that made everything clear. Principal Gudong was paying off the police. At that moment, Wang knew no one was going to give him justice. He would have to take it himself. Back in the present, Wang tells Fang that ever since the day he learned the truth, his only purpose had been revenge. Now, as the two of them argue, Lin suddenly bursts in and attacks Wang. She fights him, demanding to know where her daughter is, but Wang overpowers her. Then he drops a bombshell on Lin, telling her that he had already killed her daughter and buried her beneath the rooftop garden. Wang says that he's going to kill Lin next because in his mind, Lin was the reason Alice died. But just when it seems like it's over, Lin manages to stab Wang in the stomach with a nail. However, even so, the fight became intense, and in the end, Wang knocks Lin out. After this, Wang took teacher Fang with him in his car, completely unaware that the neighbor had already escaped. The neighbor then rushed back to the cabin where she found Lin unconscious, and acting fast, she managed to wake her up. The moment Lin came to her senses, she broke down in tears, convinced that her daughter was buried under the rooftop garden. Now, with the revenge burning inside her, she grabbed the neighbor and jumped into her car, speeding off in pursuit of Wang's van. This chase was disastrous, and in the end, a brutal crash between Lin's car and Wang's van happens. Everyone was injured badly, but despite her injuries, Lin forced herself out of the wreckage and stumbled towards Wang to unalive him. She grabbed him, demanding to know where her daughter was, but no matter how much she tortured him, Wang had only one answer. He unalived Tong and buried her in the garden on the rooftop, Lin's garden, where she used to grow those fruits. But just in time, the cops arrived and they stopped and saved all of them, Wang, Lin, and the neighbor. they all were badly injured, but the cops handled the situation before it can get worse. Now Lynn was severely injured. Her mind was flashing back to the past as she was recalling about her fruit garden. Now in the past, we saw her husband, and he was a truly abusive man who would beat her every day, even over smallest mistakes. One night, she finally tried to reach out for help. She called her mother, ready to tell her everything, but before she could, her husband smashed her head with a vase. She was helpless, and since he was the one providing for the family, she had no way out. There were nights when he would throw her out of the house, leaving her with nowhere to go. But one night, Lynn finally snapped. She picked up a large knife, the kind of knife people use to cut open coconuts. Now the scene cuts back to the present, and Wang is now arrested. Media is swarming the police station, and the families of the victims nearly attacked him, forcing the police to push through the crowd and drag him inside safely. Now inside the station, Detective Dai interrogated Wang, demanding to know where Tong is. But Wang coldly told him that her body is buried under the rooftop garden. Obviously, then detectives immediately sent a team to Lynn's rooftop. Meanwhile, another officer who had been investigating Tong's case separately noticed something: the paper ducks that were found in the abandoned house after the first 3 girls were murdered. He then carefully unfolded them, and that's when he realized something big. Actually, they were all made from a drawing that Tong made, the drawing of a man who was buried under a tree. Now in this moment, everything started to make sense to everyone. Meanwhile, at the hospital, a police team arrived to question Lynn about her husband. No one had seen her or heard anything about him for the past 5 years. The scene then flashed back to the past, revealing Lynn's husband lying dead, brutally murdered. We see that Lynn was holding that same large knife used to cut open coconuts, and yes, Lynn had unalived her abusive husband that night. After that, she buried his body under the garden where she grew fruits, and that's why she always used to tell everyone that her husband was the one who planted him. As soon as this secret was uncovered, the police dug up the rooftop garden and found Lynn's husband remain. Everyone was in shock, but then Detective Dai turned back to Wang and demanded to know where Lynn's daughter Tong really was, because obviously she was not in the garden. Upon this question, Wang simply smiled and said that Tong is now free, and then suddenly, the families of the victims rushed to the rooftop. But in that moment, Wang realized that he had no place left in this world. He then stepped off the rooftop and let himself fall to his death, meaning in the end, Wang reunited with his daughter in the afterlife, and his soul can finally rest. Now the story jumped forward a little in time. Tong was still missing, but one day, the police received a shocking video recorded by Detective Dai's own son. With the video in hand, Dai went to see Lynn, who was now in police custody, and he played it for her. The footage revealed what really happened that night when her husband died. Actually, you see, when Lynn's husband threw her out of the house, a furious Tong grabbed a pair of scissors and stabbed her father in the neck. By the time Lynn returned home with the knife in her hand, it was already too late. Lynn had planned to unalive him herself, but her 9-year-old daughter had beaten her to it, and that entire movement was recorded by Dai's son. It was clear now, Lynn had only covered up the murder to protect her daughter, but in the present, there was no hiding the truth anymore. Everything was laid bare before Detective Dai, who told Lynn that the court would now decide who the real criminal was. Obviously, Lynn broke down, begging him to not let anything happen to her daughter. She was just a child who was trying to protect her mother. Desperately, Lynn now took all the blame upon herself, pleading over and over again. But then, in a fit of rage, Dai smashed the camera and told her that you killed your husband, now you'll face the consequences. Lynn, however, smiled through her tears. She had won. If she took the blame, her daughter would be safe. So actually, you see, in the end, Dai silently accepted her plea. Now from here the scene shifts to Tong, who was still alive, sitting inside a crate in the back of a truck, heading somewhere unknown. As she sat there, memories of her mother flooded back. She knew just how much her mother had loved her, but this is where the real truth comes to life. If you remember, earlier in the past, Wang had found a phone inside his locker containing videos of his daughter. That phone actually belonged to Principal's daughter Huijun, but in reality, Tong had stolen it at the very beginning of the movie. She had intentionally made sure those videos reached Wang, and after that, she teamed up with him, carefully planning how to make those 4 girls suffer. Yes, Wang was the one who physically unalived them, but it was Tong who orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. She had been giving Wang subtle hints about when and how to unalive him. And not just that, Tong and Wang had faked their entire kidnapping scenario to throw the cops off their trail. In the end, Tong had avenged her best friend's death, and now she could finally sleep peacefully. In other words, the real mastermind behind this entire movie was Tong, and she won. In the final scene, we see Wang's spirit sitting in a boat sailing towards the afterlife. That's when his daughter's soul appears beside him, and the two reunite at last. And with that, this movie comes to an end. So this was the recap video of the movie A Place Called Silence, and I hope you have liked this video. If you have, then please subscribe the channel and give this video a thumbs up. I really need your support to grow further. If you wanna watch this movie, there's a link to my Telegram channel in the description box. If that link does not work, just go to Telegram and put my channel's name in the search bar. How and when you can find it on Telegram will be revealed on the channel, so go join that. I'm mostly active on Insta, so you can follow me there as well. For now, I see you all in the next one. Till then, stay awake, cause they always see you.